Hello and welcome to this video lecture on Chapter 18. Today we're going to be talking about market research. Some things that you should get after listening to this video and reading the book is that you should have a good understanding of the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. You also learn how to gather both of those different types of research. You also look at how important online research panels are to doing this type of research, especially the qualitative. We'll also be understanding our primary and secondary research work. And then we'll also talk about how to develop surveys online and how to get responses, especially when they're low. There are some things you can do to increase your response rate. So first, some definitions. So when we talk about quantitative research, that refers to actually getting some numbers. And so with those numbers, you can do some analysis, statistical analysis with that. And so typically what you will do with quantitative research is that you'll have some kind of hypothesis before you collect the data, and then you'll be able to test the hypothesis afterwards. So you typically do not just go out and collect data and then try and come up with a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is an idea of how you think something is going to be, and it usually has a theoretical basis, so it's grounded in research. Qualitative data is a little bit more difficult to put some numbers on, but it can be done. But it's more about analyzing a feeling or a sentiment, and so that's more difficult to get out of people and to then actually say that the majority of the people feel this way. Now, the idea behind doing any kind of research is that you can't actually survey the entire population of what it is that you're trying to look at. So typically you will take a sample size, and that sample size you want to be representative of the population that you want to generalize towards. And so in qualitative data, it may be more difficult to get a good sample that's representative of the general population that you want to generalize to. So let's say I want to generalize to how people use their cell phones. So would getting a group of college students be representative of the general population as a whole? Some people would say yes, other people would say no, not really. There's still a good proportion of people who don't have a college education that have smartphones, and they may be using those differently. And so you got to be careful about making sure that your sample size is representative of the population that you want to generalize towards. So when we do this type of research, both quantitative and qualitative data can be produced using primary or secondary data. Primary data is data that you've collected. Secondary data is data that you've got from somewhere else where somebody else has collected. Now, if you're doing any kind of market research on the web, then using some kind of web analytics package is a good source of data. So something like Google Analytics will allow you to grab that data. And so when you're conducting research, there's various means you can do this. Your book talks about two of those. One is to use a research panel, and that'll help you conduct qualitative research, or you can use research communities, which provide quantitative data. You can also use focus groups, which is done a lot in marketing. And so if you look at this bottom point here, a focus group is a form of qualitative research where a group or people are asked questions in a group setting. So you might bring all these people into a room. They're your focus group. You'll ask them about a product or service, Typically, you'll let them try this product or service first, then you get them all back and you ask them, what did you think about it? What were the positive things? What were the negative things? And so on. So if we're using this focus group, then you can see some different approaches to where we get the qualitative and the quantitative research. So in a qualitative research, the number of participants is usually going to be 6 to 10 people led by a moderator or facilitator. That's the focus group. So quantitative research, I might send out a survey. I get a large number of respondents, maybe 100 more, depending on the size of the population that I'm surveying. So if I send out an ad, not an ad, but a survey to say 1,000 people, I might expect somewhere between 20 and 30% respondents back. So to get 230 to 300 respondents out of 1,000 is pretty good. That's typically what you see in quantitative research. Moving on down to the approach area here, then in quantitative, you're usually asking the people for their ideas or concepts, and that leads to issues or hypotheses to be tested. And so hopefully then you can do some other hypothesis testing in the future with some qualitative or quantitative data. The problem with that then is it shouldn't be used with evaluating pre-existing ideas, because you've got such a small group. It's not, whatever you get out of them is not really a good predictor of the population. And so you would use this approach when you're trying to understand different perspectives. So maybe you came out with a new product, you're not sure why people are using it a certain way, and you want to find out why. And so you would bring in this focus group and do some qualitative research. Now, with quantitative research, you're actually having a hypothesis before you ever get started. So you would come up with that based on your literature review. What does the literature currently say about this? You come up with your own hypothesis based on that. You develop some tests or some surveys and you send that out, and hopefully you get enough response back that you could generalize to the general population. The sample size is typically you would want at least 30, but you can do some power analysis that says based on the number of questions and the type of people you're asking, it will tell you how many people you need to have responses back from. So typically when you have that, then your statistics will be reliable and will help you prove or disprove your hypothesis. And when you're collecting your own data, then that's going to be your primary research. If you're getting data from, say, a census bureau or a medical database, then that's secondary research. So that you're collecting data that's already been done and it's already sitting out there. You may be asking different kinds of questions or even the same kind of question, but combining it with data from other places. Now, some of the benefits of using secondary data is that it doesn't cost as much in terms of time in order to go and get the data. Currently, I know that I have a friend that's working on a research project, and they're collecting data from pregnant women and how they metabolize certain types of nutrients, and it's going to take them about 2 years to get about 80 patients worth of data. And so that's very time consuming, it's lengthy. The secondary data, somebody else has already done that. You can grab the data. Hopefully it would help you solve the problem at hand by doing the analysis on that. You don't have to go out and collect it. Some other benefits of looking at secondary data is that it can give you an idea of how much data is out there, what did other people use to collect the data, what were their sample sizes, was it enough? That'll give you an idea if you need to do primary research, how much data you're going to need to collect. Now, it might be possible to get your secondary data from companies that do a lot of business online. They'll have a whole bunch of data, and if you could ask them the right questions, make sure that you're not violating anybody's privacy, they might be able to share that with you. You can also look at the internet and see if what kind of research has been done. You can go to Google Scholar, look up things there. At the library, we have access to scholarly databases where you can do some additional research as well. And so if you're out of school, you may want to go to your local library and see if they might have access to that or some kind of scholarly database that you could use. And so your first point of contact to do research is to look at an online search engine like Google and try and find any information that might be relevant to what you're trying to do and what you're trying to prove. So the data that you decide you're going to collect, that'll be primary research. Just keep in mind that your primary data can be either qualitative or quantitative in nature. And so when you're doing research, you want to build on previous research, and so you're advancing the knowledge in that area. And so you look at the hypothesis on the previous research, you come up with your own hypothesis, and you may change the hypothesis slightly in what you're actually looking for, collect the data, and then hopefully then you publish your results, and then somebody else can build upon that and move the question or whatever you're looking at forward in the realm of a theory and the different hypotheses that have gone with that theory. So here's a graphic that shows you the different places you might go to do primary and secondary research. So primary research stuff you're collecting yourself, you might use web analytics, surveys, listing labs, focus groups, those sort of things. Then with secondary data, you're going to look at stuff that's already been out there, published articles, blogs, any kind of white papers, so on. The next thing I want to talk about is surveys. These are online surveys, so they're electronic in nature. You give somebody the URL and they come back and they can take that survey for you. And so with the use of the internet, it makes doing online surveys rather easy to do. And so then you can gather a lot of data quickly if you send it out to the right people. But that's all based on how you design a survey. If you design a survey such that it's going to take somebody 30, 40 minutes to fill out, they're probably not going to want to do it. So you need to think about the length of the survey, how easy is it for the user to fill out and complete. So you don't want to get an incomplete survey. I know there's been several times when I'd start taking the survey and I'd get to the 4th or 5th page and it just looks like it's going to go on for a whole bunch more pages. I just exit out. Well, to the person that designed the survey, now they've got incomplete data and they have to then decide, do they use this person's results or not as part of their data analysis? And so it can be very difficult for them to collect enough data then if a lot of people are dropping out halfway through. You've also got to think about how you ask your questions. Some questions people consider too personal and won't answer. An example might be, how much do you make? Well, nobody wants to say exactly how much they make. Somebody might use that information against them somehow. So when it comes to asking about money, you'll ask probably in a range, is your salary in this range, and so on. And so these are just little things that you learn from a survey creation type class, which is beyond the scope of this class. But if you don't write good survey questions, people aren't going to answer them, or they're going to leave them blank, which means you can't really use that data as part of your analysis because it's incomplete. You also need to be careful about leading the person that's completing your survey. So you don't want to introduce any bias by asking leading questions. They need to be brief, easy to understand, and easy to answer. There should also be only one question that you're asking per question. And what I mean by that is a lot of times I've seen some surveys where they'll be asking, well, how do you feel about the length of this book and the number of chapters that were in this book? Well, that's two questions there. So the length of the book and the number of chapters, you may feel completely different. So how does the user usually respond? And then if they respond, you've then got to decide, well, were they thinking about the chapter or were they thinking about the book? And so you don't want to be doing those type of questions. So, the different types of questions you can have is the open-ended ones where they could write in something, close-ended ones where they would actually make a choice of some type. You could have them rank or some kind of ordinal. So you might rank, which one of these do you feel is the most expensive? And then they rank them all the least expensive. The question, the problem with ranking is if you rank a 1 and a 2, is a 1 more, twice as much as a 1, and as a 3, as you compare it to 3, is that twice as much as a 2, so on. You get into those sort of issues. Then you get into the rating issues as well. And there's all kinds of different statistical techniques that you can use to overcome the kind of biases in terms of the data that you're collecting and the population you're collecting it from. Now, once you send out a survey, you may not get enough responses back, and so you may have to provide some kind of incentive for people to complete the survey. So sometimes you might see things like, well, I'll send you $1 if you complete it, or I've seen some surveys will come in the mail and they'll say, here's $1 for completing this. And research on doing surveys suggests that giving somebody some money beforehand might increase their chances of actually doing the survey for you. You also can use things like, I'll put you in a drawing for $250 or $25 gift card, and so that might help your response rates as well. Another thing is that if you're doing it electronically, you send out your initial request, and then you wait 2 weeks and you send out another request saying, for those of you that didn't do the survey, would you please do it? And this is how I plan on using the survey. And then you could also offer these incentives again. But typically you may not want to respond or follow up more than twice after the initial survey. Then it becomes people are just being annoyed by you asking them to fill out the survey all the time. And so you got to be careful there, because you may want to use these same people again to survey them on something else. And so you don't want to get them agitated with you or upset with you where they won't do another survey for you. So how do you sell a survey to your boss? And so one thing you can do is think about the benefits of the research to the business. So you got to tell your boss that, if I do this research, we're going to be able to know this and this, and then we'll be able to do things better this way. And so they've got to see some value in it, and then they've got to determine, is the value greater than the cost of doing this survey? And that cost can include, developing the survey, the person's time and in terms of doing the research and the analysis of the data on the results and so on. Other factors to consider, the depth of the research that's required. How is this going to help the business grow? And the same thing I was mentioning earlier, the cost to benefit ratio. Is the value, the benefit, going to outweigh the cost of doing this survey? So in terms of actually doing some research, then you've got to do the following. You want to establish some goals for the project. How do you know if you're going to be successful or not? How are you going to know what the sample size needs to be? What kind of statistical analysis are you going to do? That's the research methodology. Actually create the questions. You typically want to run a pre-test on your questionnaire to see what the response might be, and then ask yourself, based on these responses, is this what I really want to analyze, or because of their responses I have some additional questions, and so you'll add those to the survey. Or maybe based on the responses you're saying, I don't need these other questions, and you'll take those out and make for a shorter survey. You might want to also ask the people who are doing the survey if they see any problems. If you're doing any kind of qualitative research, you want to do those interviews and enter the data. And then lastly, you want to do the analysis of the data and then report your results. And so as you conduct this research, you need to also think about the types of errors you might get. So you might get some kind of sampling error. You might also get some respondent error. They're not thinking what the question is truly intended to try and get out of them. Who is your target audience? Did you do a good sample size for the population that you're trying to generalize to? And so you can use some different statistical techniques to correct for that, or you may just have to redesign for a new questionnaire. And so that ends this chapter on a brief overview of market research. If you're interested in this, there are entire courses that you can take about market research. This is just a general overview to help you understand what it takes in order to set up the entire process to go out and do a questionnaire or to do a focus group, gather the data, and analyze the data. And so that ends this chapter.